The hardest thing a man can do is look at his own reflection and realize the face staring back at him belongs to someone nobody was waiting for anymore. I spent most of my adult life believing that love worked like a contract, that if you showed up long enough, worked hard enough, sacrificed quietly enough, the people you gave everything to would hold your place at the table. I was 63 years old before I finally understood that some people don't save you a seat. They just let you stand in the doorway until they need something heavy lifted. It took a Thanksgiving flood, a borrowed John boat, and a camera crew from the county emergency broadcast to teach me that lesson. And by the time it was over, I had lost a son who treated me like a spare key, and found a community that knew exactly what kind of man I was when the water started rising. Welcome to Dad's True Story. If you've ever been the kind of father who gave every working hour, every dollar of savings, every drop of energy you had to the people who shared your last name, only to find out that none of it bought you a permanent place in their lives, then you already know the particular weight of what I'm about to share. Before we get into how that Thanksgiving changed everything, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, and leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. I read every single one, and knowing that other fathers and mothers out there are listening is the only reason I keep telling these stories. To understand why that week went the way it did, you first need to know about a man named Roy Duchamp. Roy is 68 years old and lives in a pale green house on the edge of Crestfield, Louisiana, about 2 miles from the Atchafalaya Basin. He's a retired Army Corps of Engineers surveyor who spent 31 years measuring floodplains, calculating levee tolerances, and watching the water do exactly what he always warned people it would do. His hearing is about 60% on a good day from years of working near heavy equipment, and he walks with a slight forward lean that makes him look like he's always heading somewhere with purpose. His front porch has mismatched chairs and a coffee can he uses as an ashtray. And every Tuesday and Thursday morning, he runs a free boat maintenance clinic out of his garage for the elderly and low-income residents in the basin communities. People who depend on their vessels the way most folks depend on their cars. He doesn't charge anyone a dime. He just shows up, opens the garage door, and works until the last person leaves satisfied. Roy Duchamp is the kind of man who understands what water can take from people, and he made it his life's work to make sure it didn't take everything. My name is Gerald Mosher. I'm 63 years old, and for the last 28 years, I've run a small civil excavation and drainage company out of Crestfield. My hands are permanently stained at the knuckles from years of working in clay soil. I own 2 excavators, a long-reach backhoe, 3 dump trucks, and a drainage jetting unit that cost me more than my first house. I have spent my entire working life understanding exactly how water moves through land, where it pools, where it breaks through, and what it destroys when nobody planned for it. My ex-wife, Sandra, left me 7 years ago for a man named Preston Halliday. Preston is a commercial real estate developer out of Baton Rouge who wears linen shirts and talks about property yield with the confident ease of a man who has never once shoveled a trench. When Sandra moved into his house in the Garden District, I didn't fight it. I was tired in a way that a divorce attorney couldn't have fixed. I just let it happen, paid what needed to be paid, and kept my head down. My son, Marcus, was 29 when the marriage ended. He handled the divorce the way he handled most things in his adult life, by drifting toward whoever seemed most comfortable. And Preston was very, very comfortable. Within 2 years, Marcus had a position at Preston's development firm, a new truck that Preston co-signed for, and a condo in Baton Rouge that Preston helped him furnish. I told myself I wasn't jealous. I told myself what mattered was that Marcus was doing well. I kept paying for the insurance on that truck until Marcus asked me to stop because, and I remember the exact words, it made things awkward with Preston. I should have understood the shape of things right then. But a father lies to himself the same way a levee engineer lies to himself. You tell yourself the pressure is manageable, right up until the moment the wall gives way. Monday, November 18th, 4:45 in the afternoon. I was sitting in the cab of my F-350 in the parking lot of our supply yard on Route 11, going over a drainage survey for a job we were starting out in Sorrento. The sky was the color of a bruise, and the air had that thick, heavy quality that anyone who's lived near the basin their whole life recognizes as a warning. My phone lit up on the seat beside me. Marcus. I picked it up on the second ring. "Hey, son. Good to hear from you." "Dad." His voice had that measured, careful tone that I had come to understand meant he had rehearsed what he was about to say. "So, Thanksgiving. I wanted to talk to you about this before it got too close." I set my survey papers aside. We had always done Thanksgiving the same way since the divorce. Marcus would drive down to Crestfield on Wednesday. We'd spend Thanksgiving together at my house on Oleander Street, just the two of us and whoever I could get to come by, and then he'd drive up to Sandra and Preston's for the long weekend. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. "Preston's family is coming in from out of state," Marcus said. "His brother's whole family, his sister, their kids. It's going to be a big gathering, and Preston really wants to make it a full family holiday. Sandra is hosting at the house." I waited a moment. "Okay, so we can still do Wednesday evening, right? I'll smoke a brisket. We can keep it simple." "Dad." The way he said it, just those two letters, with that thin, patient exhale underneath them, I already knew. It's not just Thanksgiving Day. Preston booked everyone in at the house from Wednesday through Sunday. He's got things planned, activities for the kids, a dinner reservation Friday night. He's really investing in bringing everyone together, and Sandra wants me to be there for the whole thing. It would be weird if I had to cut out early, or if you came by while they're all there. "Marcus," I said, and I kept my voice as level as I could. "I haven't seen you since your birthday in July. That's 4 months. I know, and I'm sorry. But this is important to Sandra, and it's important to Preston. He's been really good to me, Dad. I don't want to make things complicated for him. He's been good to you." I let those words settle. Preston Halliday, who had never once picked up a shovel, never driven Marcus to a 6 a.m. practice, never sat in an emergency room at midnight, holding a plastic bowl, because the kid had a fever of 104 and couldn't stop throwing up. Preston Halliday had been good to him. The checkout line at a grocery store is good to you. That doesn't make the cashier your father. "So, what am I supposed to do for Thanksgiving, Marcus?" I asked quietly. "Dad, you're a resourceful guy. You'll find something." He actually laughed a little when he said it, like it was a minor inconvenience. Like I was a scheduling conflict. I heard the call end. He didn't say goodbye. Just the soft click of disconnection, and then the sound of the rain starting on the roof of my truck cab. I sat there in the parking lot for a while, watching the water begin to sheet down my windshield. If you've ever had a moment where the person you would have walked through fire for just reduced you to a logistical problem they'd rather not deal with, if you know that particular silence, then I hope you'll take a second and hit that like button. There are more of us sitting in truck cabs feeling exactly this way than anyone ever talks about. Tuesday evening, November 19th. I couldn't stay in my house on Oleander Street, looking at the kitchen table I'd already set up with the good placemats, because some part of me had been stupidly, stubbornly hopeful. So, I loaded my drainage pump, 300 feet of 2-inch discharge hose, and my portable lighting rig into the back of the F-350 and drove down to Roy Duchamp's garage on the edge of the basin. He was underneath a flat-bottomed aluminum boat when I pulled in, replacing a transom board with the unhurried precision of a man who trusted his own hands completely. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just pulled my work gloves out of my back pocket and started sorting through the pile of marine-grade lumber stacked against the garage wall. Roy slid out from under the boat and looked at me. He didn't ask why I was there on a Tuesday night. He just nodded once, the way men do when they understand the weight of something without needing it explained. We worked for about 90 minutes before he poured coffee from a dented percolator he kept on a shelf between a box of stainless screws and a jar of engine degreaser. He handed me a cup and we stood in the open garage door, looking out at the basin. The water was already up 3 or 4 inches from where it had been last week. The sky above the cypress trees was the particular dark green that Roy and I both knew meant serious weather was coming. "The National Weather Service is calling for 6 inches over 48 hours, Roy said, not looking at me. "That's on top of already saturated ground. The gauges at the upper basin are running high." He took a sip of his coffee. "This one's going to push into some neighborhoods that haven't seen water in 30 years. I told him about Marcus. Not all of it, just enough. He didn't offer me any comfort or careful words about how kids come around eventually. Roy Duchamp was not that kind of man. He looked out at the water for a moment. Then he said, "A man who knows how to move water has a responsibility when the water decides to move on its own." The people out in those basin communities. They've been calling me all week asking if they should sandbag. Half of them don't have anyone else to ask. He looked at me sideways. You still have the long reach on your trailer? I told him I did. He nodded, looking back at the basin. You got plans for Thanksgiving? I didn't say anything. He already knew the answer. Wednesday, November 20th. The rain came in before dawn. By Thursday morning, Thanksgiving Day, the Atchafalaya had pushed through 3 low-lying neighborhoods on the south end of Crestfield that hadn't flooded since 1989. The parish emergency management was overwhelmed. The main road into the Derville community was under 2 feet of moving water. A family of 5 in a 1-story house on Picard Lane had called 911 4 times and couldn't get a response because every available unit was dealing with a multi-vehicle accident on the interstate caused by the visibility. Roy called me at 5:30 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day. I was already awake. I was already dressed. We worked for the next 60 hours without stopping for anything except bad coffee and gas station sandwiches. Roy had 2 John boats, his flat-bottomed aluminum workboat, and an older fiberglass hull he kept as a backup. I hitched both trailers to my F-350, and we launched from the elevated boat ramp on Millard Road. Then we worked the neighborhoods systematically, the way Roy's Army Corps training had taught him to street by street, house by house, knocking on doors, assessing who needed to move and who could shelter in place above the waterline. I used my long-reach backhoe to clear a collapsed culvert on the south end of Derville that was backing water up into 12 residential properties. The job took 4 hours in standing water and driving rain, but once the culvert cleared, the sheet flow dropped 8 inches within the hour. A man named Vernon Guidry, who was 71 years old and had been watching the water creep up his porch steps all morning, shook my hand through my truck window with both of his, just holding on for a moment, not saying much. He didn't have to. Roy ran the boats while I handled the equipment. We evacuated 22 residents from the Derville community, including a woman named Delphine Arsenault, who was 84 years old, weighed about 90 pounds, and absolutely refused to leave until Roy agreed to bring her cat. We delivered emergency water and dry goods to 11 families on Picard Lane who chose to shelter in their second floors. We cleared 3 debris jams that were choking the drainage channels behind the St. Clair subdivision. By Saturday evening, Thanksgiving weekend, I had not slept more than 90 minutes in 2 days. My boots had been wet for so long that I'd stopped feeling my feet. My shoulders ached in a way that made me understand, clearly and without sentimentality, that I was 63 years old and I had been loading and unloading equipment for 48 hours in the rain. But my mind was completely quiet, not the empty quiet of loneliness, the full quiet of a man who has been entirely used up in the right direction. At around 9 o'clock on Saturday night, a parish emergency management SUV pulled up to where Roy and I were resetting the drainage pump on Millard Road. A man named Captain Delacroix stepped out. He told us that the parish had been tracking our work through resident calls and their own field teams, and that they'd coordinated with the local ABC affiliate to do a piece on the volunteer response for the Saturday evening news. There was a camera crew from Channel 7 parked about 100 feet behind him. The reporter was a young man, maybe 30, who looked like he hadn't expected the weather to be quite this serious when he'd gotten dressed for work. He walked over with his microphone while his cameraman positioned the shot. "We are live with Channel 7 Evening News," he said, his voice slightly strained from the wind. "I'm standing with 2 Crestfield residents who have been operating independently in the Derville and St. Clair flood zones since Thanksgiving morning. Sir, can you tell me your name and how long you've been out here?" I looked at the camera the same way I'd look at any piece of equipment, straight and without performance. Gerald Mosher. "I run a drainage and excavation company here in Crestfield. This is Roy Duchamp. Roy knows this basin better than anybody alive. We've been out here since about 5:30 Thursday morning. Mr. Mosher, Parish Emergency Management tells us you single-handedly cleared the Derville culvert that was responsible for significant flooding to over a dozen homes. What made you come out here on Thanksgiving instead of spending the holiday with your family?" I let out a slow breath that turned to mist in the cold air. "My family had other arrangements this year," I said. "My son was spending the holiday with his stepfather's family, so I had some time available." Roy told me where the water was going. "I know how to move water. It seemed like the right place to be." The reporter nodded. "Mr. Mosher, Parish records show that you and Mr. Duchamp also evacuated over 20 residents, including elderly individuals, and ran supply runs to families sheltering in place. On Thanksgiving Day, Roy looked at me. I looked at the reporter. I just said, "There are people in those houses who have nobody else. That's reason enough." We thanked him and got back to work. Roy gave me a look as we walked back to the pump. "What?" I said. He just shook his head slowly, the corner of his mouth doing something that wasn't quite a smile. Sunday, November 24th, just past midnight. Roy and I secured the boats and loaded the last of the equipment back onto my trailer. I dropped Roy at his pale green house on the Basin Road. He shook my hand at his front door. His grip was solid despite his age, the grip of a man who had spent his life doing real things with his hands. "You did right, Gerald," he said simply. "Get some sleep." I drove back to Oleander Street. My house was cold and dark except for the porch light I always leave on. I stripped off my wet gear in the utility room and walked into the kitchen. My phone was on the counter where I'd left it Friday morning. The screen showed 44 missed calls. 31 were from Marcus. 9 were from Sandra. 3 were from a number I didn't recognize that I later realized was Preston Halliday's personal cell. There were also text messages going back to Saturday afternoon, timestamps climbing through the evening like a tide. I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at the screen for a moment. Then the phone started vibrating in my hand. "Marcus." I slid it open. "Gerald Mosher," I said. I didn't say, "Hey, son." I don't know why. I just gave him my name. "Dad." His voice came through with a quality I hadn't heard from him in years. The careful, measured tone was gone. He sounded young, uncertain. "Dad, oh my God. Are you all right? Where have you been?" "Working," I said. "I've been out in the Durville area since Thursday morning. Just got in." "Dad," he said, and his voice cracked on the word in a way that might have meant something, or might have just been relief that the logistical problem of me hadn't drowned somewhere in the Atchafalaya. "We were at Preston's house. The power came back on about an hour ago. Preston turned on the news and you were right there on the television. The anchor called you by name. They said the parish credited you and Roy Duchamp with preventing significant additional flood damage to residential areas. They said you evacuated over 20 people. On Thanksgiving Day." "Roy's a good man," I said. "He knows that basin cold." "Dad." He paused, and in the background I could hear Sandra's voice somewhere, tight and high, and Preston's lower register underneath it, measured and controlled. "You told that reporter your family had other arrangements. You said your son was with his stepfather." "I told the reporter the truth," I said. "That's what happened." "Dad, Preston's business contacts have been calling him all night. His partner's wife texted Sandra during dinner asking why the man on the Channel 7 emergency broadcast said his son chose a holiday party over him while he was out rescuing people in a flood. Preston had to step out of the room twice to take calls. His whole family heard it. It made it look like we just abandoned you out there." I looked out the kitchen window at the rain still running off the eaves. There it was. Not "Are you safe?" Not "Were you cold?" Not "Did you sleep?" The question was about how it looked to Preston's business contacts over the holiday dinner table. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I didn't say you abandoned me. I said you had other arrangements. That's what you told me when you called. You told me Preston had the family in, that it was a full holiday through the weekend, and that it would be weird if I came by, or if you had to cut out early. You told me to find something to do. So I found something to do. You didn't have to put it on television," he said, and the edge that came into his voice. Then the old familiar edge of embarrassment, dressed up as accusation. That was the Marcus I recognized from the last several years. "I didn't put it anywhere," I said. "A reporter asked me a question and I answered it honestly. If the honest answer is uncomfortable, that's a different problem." He was quiet for a moment. Then, Preston's sister asked Sandra at dinner if she knew her ex-husband was the man on the news. Sandra had to explain the whole situation. "Preston is upset. He'd put a lot of work into this weekend." "I'm sure he had," I said. "Dad," Marcus said, and his voice shifted again lower, more careful, and I realized he was moving to a different room, away from the others. "The truth is, the power went out at Preston's house Friday night during the storm. The generator they installed last year couldn't handle the load. The basement took on some water. Preston's had crews out all weekend, but the drainage around the property is a mess, and they can't get the water to move. He paused. Your equipment, your long reach, the drainage jetting unit, I know you have it. Could you come up to Baton Rouge? Preston would pay you. Full rate, whatever you charge. I sat with that for a long moment. 5 years ago, even 5 months ago, I would have been in my truck before the sentence was finished. I would have driven through whatever remained of that storm, unloaded my equipment in Preston Halliday's perfectly landscaped driveway, and solved his drainage problem. And I would have told myself that at least it got me time with Marcus. I would have bought the peace with my own labor and called it love. That man was gone. He had left somewhere around the 3rd hour in the Durville culvert, standing in 2 feet of moving water in the dark, clearing debris with his bare hands so that 12 families could stop watching the floodwater climb their baseboards. No, Marcus, I said. I can't do that. What? His voice was genuinely startled. Why not? You have the equipment sitting right there. My equipment is spoken for, I said. Roy and I have 2 more drainage channels to clear in the St. Clair area Monday morning. There are families who've been waiting since Thursday. I gave Roy my word. Dad, Preston is offering to pay you. I know what Preston is offering, I said. Preston is a wealthy man. He has resources and contacts, and he built a very successful business. I'm sure he can find someone to address his drainage issue. That's what you do when you have resources. There was a pause. Then Marcus said, quietly, so you're choosing strangers over your own son. I let that land. Then I said, I'm not choosing strangers over you, Marcus. You chose Preston's family gathering over Thanksgiving with me. That was your choice, and you made it freely, and I don't hold it against you. But when the water came up and Roy Duchamp called me at 5:30 in the morning, I didn't think about Preston's drainage problem. I thought about Vernon Guidry and Delphine Arsenault, and 11 families sitting on their second floors waiting for someone to show up. I went where I was needed. That is different. It is a fundamentally different thing from going where you are convenient. And Marcus, I am 63 years old. It took me this long to finally understand the difference. Dad, he said, and his voice had gone very quiet. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm going to bed. I've been awake for 60 hours. You call Roy on Monday if Preston needs a drainage referral. Roy knows every contractor in the parish. I ended the call. I turned the phone face down on the counter and walked down the hall to my bedroom. I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt very tired and very clean, the way you feel after a long piece of hard work is finished and you know it was done right. Monday, November 25th, 7:30 in the morning. The rain had moved east overnight, and the sky above Crestfield came up pale gold, the kind of clear that only follows serious weather. I made a full pot of coffee, the real kind, not the percolator dirt Roy preferred, and sat at my kitchen table by the window. I turned my phone back on. There were more texts. Sandra, telling me I had humiliated the family. Marcus, a long message that started as an apology and ended as a justification. One text from a number I didn't know that turned out to be Captain Delacroix from the Parish Emergency Management Office, asking if Roy and I would be willing to be recognized at the next parish council meeting. I set the phone down and drank my coffee and watched a pair of herons work the drainage ditch behind my property fence. I didn't reply to any of it. Not because I was angry. I just didn't have anything to add. Around 9, I loaded the long reach back onto the trailer and drove down to Roy's place on the Basin Road. He was already outside, sitting on his porch in the pale morning sun with a wool blanket over his knees and a cup of that terrible coffee balanced on the railing. I pulled up and walked around to the back of my truck. I'd stopped at the gas station on Route 11 and bought a box of those small pecan pies they sell at the counter, the kind wrapped in cellophane that are mostly sugar and not much else, but it was what they had. I set the box on the porch table beside his coffee cup. Thought you might want some breakfast. Roy looked at the box, then up at me, and his face did that thing it did not quite a smile, but something in the territory of one. He said, "The Christmas Eve guardian of the Atchafalaya Basin." He picked up a pecan pie and unwrapped it with his thick, deliberate fingers. "Don't start," I said, and sat down on the top step. We stayed there for a while in the quiet morning. The basin was calmer now, pulling back toward its banks the way it always did after a big push, slow and indifferent, as if it had simply been making a point. Somewhere down the road, a rooster was doing his delayed morning work. A dog answered him from 3 lots over. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the sound of his voice when he was 8 years old, calling for me from the backyard because he'd found a turtle in the drainage ditch and wanted to show me. I thought about the years between then and now, and all the small moments where something had shifted so gradually that I hadn't noticed the direction we were traveling until we were already somewhere I didn't recognize. I didn't feel angry about it. I felt the particular sadness of a man who understands that some distances can only be closed from one direction, and that he has already walked as far as he can go. But I also felt something else, something that had been absent from my chest for a long time, a quiet steadiness, like a level reading true after years of settling and correction. I had spent 5 years making myself smaller, more convenient, more palatable. I had tried to earn back a place at a table that had quietly been given away, and in 60 hours of cold water and hard work and no sleep, I had stopped trying. Roy Duchamp was not a man who offered speeches. But after a while, he looked out at the basin and said, without looking at me, "You know what water teaches you, after 30 years of working with it?" I waited. "It goes where it's supposed to go," he said. "You can fight it, redirect it, build walls against it, but eventually it finds its level." He took a sip of his coffee. "People are the same. So are men." We sat there until the sun was fully up and the pecan pies were gone and the herons had moved further down the bank. And for the first time in longer than I could properly remember, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had lost a son who only remembered I existed when the water rose, and he needed equipment moved. But I had found 40-some families in the D'Urville and St. Clair communities who would know my name and Roy's name long after the water had forgotten it ever came. I had found a pale green house on a basin road where 2 old men could drink bad coffee and watch the morning come up without needing to explain themselves to anyone. And for a man of 63 who had spent a long time being an option in the life of someone he loved, that was not a small thing. That was everything. Thank you for being here and for listening. If you've ever had to learn the difference between where you're needed and where you're only convenient, if you've sat in a truck or at a kitchen table and felt the cold weight of that realization, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. The people on this channel understand something that the rest of the world doesn't always make room for, that a man's worth doesn't expire. It just sometimes has to go looking for the right place to be spent. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss another story, and take care of yourselves out there. Go where you're needed.